The Alexander brothers, once titans of luxury real estate and security, are now facing an explosive wave of accusations that could destroy everything they've built. 11 new lawsuits have emerged this week, adding to a growing list of shocking claims: sexual assault, drugging, exploitation that stretch across more than a decade and across multiple cities. With their futures hanging in the balance, we are going to break down the jaw-dropping details of these new legal battles. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Once considered titans in the luxury real estate and security worlds, the Alexander brothers, Tal, Oren, and their brother Alon, are now facing a rapidly growing and, I will say, frightening list of accusations. Because now 11 more women have come forward, filing lawsuits that accuse these brothers of sexual assault, drugging, and exploitation. And these new legal actions that were filed on Tuesday in New York, they have escalated what is already a devastating legal battle for the brothers. Because what do we know? They are also facing criminal charges related to sex trafficking and sexual assault. This latest wave of lawsuits, it brings the total number of legal claims against the brothers to a staggering, I think our count was 17, and that just marks a dramatic fall from grace for the once celebrated moguls, right? Tal and Oren, they were known for their lavish lifestyles, their dominance in the luxury real estate market. Now, facing allegations spanning multiple cities: Miami, New York City, Moscow. We'll talk about that. Alon, this is Oren's twin, who is primarily involved in the family's security business. He's also named in several of the cases. And now, just to get you caught up to speed on this, to let you know what we're talking about, the brothers are facing federal sex trafficking and conspiracy charges. Basically, the prosecutors allege that they used their wealth and their status to lure, drug, and sexually assault multiple women. And by the way, these brothers were also arrested in December out in Miami Beach. They pleaded not guilty to the charges, but in addition to the federal charges, Oren and Alon, they face Florida state charges related to 3 separate alleged assault incidents too. And they have also pleaded not guilty to those. A family friend, by the way, and real estate broker Ahad Fisherman, was named as an accomplice in one of those assaults. Fisherman apparently surrendered to authorities in December. He was released on bail. But now we want to talk about this latest round of legal filings submitted just this week. It is only added to the brothers' nightmare. And by the way, it is added to the allegations and the alleged pattern of what has been put forward by prosecutors. So these lawsuits are mostly being filed under New York's Gender-Motivated Violence Act. We've talked about it here before on Sidebar because it's been invoked in lawsuits against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. So the GMVA allows victims of gender-based violence, meaning this act of violence was committed based on an animus towards someone's gender. Sexual assault would categorize as that. So the GMVA allows these alleged victims to bring forward claims that might otherwise be barred by the statute of limitations. So to file a lawsuit under this, the incident must have occurred within the 5 boroughs of New York. So it has to have happened here. And the survivor must have experienced some sort of physical or emotional suffering as a result of this violence as well. And previously, survivors had only several years from the date of the incident to file a claim under the GMVA, but in December of 2022, the New York City Council introduced a 2-year look-back window, which allowed survivors to file claims even if the incident occurred outside of the standard time frame. But then there was actually an expiration date on this look-back window, February 28th, 2025, so it's coming up soon. But this is why we have seen a surge in lawsuits filed not only against the Alexander brothers, but as I mentioned, against Sean Combs in recent months. I gotta say, as this story and most of the stories on Sidebar show, the world can be something, right? It's scary thinking about how to protect yourself. And we always try to partner with companies that can maybe help you out in providing some security. Well, I tell you what, now we have our sponsor, Delete Me. Did you know that your personal data is being harvested and sold online by data brokers? Yeah, anyone can buy your personal information. And when that happens, you're at risk for a whole host of things: identity theft, phishing scams, potential stalking. But Delete Me helps keep your personal information private. I mean, they found dozens of data brokers with my information. They had to remove it from multiple listings. And by the way, Delete Me will keep monitoring the sites for you so your information doesn't find its way back on there after the first removal. And using Delete Me has given me me peace of mind about my family too, because if someone buys your data via a data broker, they can see information about your relatives too. So right now you can get 20% off Delete Me and protect your personal data when you go to joindeleteme.com/sidebar and use promo code sidebar at checkout. So turning back to the recent wave of lawsuits against the Alexander brothers, these suits contain allegations that date back over a decade. In fact, the oldest allegations or accusations go back to 2011. The most recent claims, 2019. So these cases, they vary in severity, but I will tell you, notably, 7 of the 11 women involved in these lawsuits claim that they were drugged before being assaulted, which just adds another chilling layer to these accusations. Now, interestingly, of these 11 lawsuits, all filed on behalf of female accusers, only one woman has chosen to publicly identify herself. That woman, Leah Peters, is suing Oren Alexander for an alleged assault that took place in 2018 out in Miami. The rest of the women remain anonymous, listed as Jane Does. And by the way, as we've seen recently in the Sean Combs case, we will see if they are allowed to remain anonymous by the court. Certain judges, certain courts have said that can't continue. So now we want to break down the allegations in these lawsuits, and we're going to go through each one of them. We'll start with the earliest claims. We'll go in chronological order to keep things clear and easy to follow. But let's begin with Jane Doe's case filed over an alleged assault by Tal Alexander in January 2011. So according to her lawsuit, Jane Doe lived across the street from the Alexander brothers in Little Italy, Manhattan, and she had known them for years. So around January 2011, she claims that she ran into the brothers while out in the city, and they invited her to hang out with them. Since they lived nearby, she trusted them, agreed to join them. A taxi apparently pulls up. Jane Doe says she gets into the cab with Tal Alexander, but instead of going to the party as planned, Tal allegedly instructed the driver to take them back to his apartment. And once inside, Jane Doe claims that as soon as the door closed behind them, Tal exposed himself. And we're not going to go into full graphic detail here, but you'll get the general gist of what I'm saying here, because her lawsuit claims, quote, Tal then took out his genitals and forcibly took plaintiff's hand, making her touch his genitals for approximately 1 minute. Plaintiff was deeply uncomfortable and, realizing the situation, pushed him away and immediately left the apartment, returning to her residence. And as a result of this incident, Jane Doe says that she suffered extreme anxiety, disassociation, emotional distress. She claims that she even developed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, experienced flashbacks from what allegedly happened. And she also states that she didn't come forward sooner because she feared that Tal would retaliate against her. Now, that is a big theme about why all of these accusers didn't come forward earlier. If all of this was true, you see that become an issue or a question anytime a powerful or wealthy or high-profile defendant is accused of sexual assault or misconduct, right? You'll hear a little bit later the response from the brothers, but one theory is, okay, they get criminally charged, they get accused of one thing, everybody's going to come out of the woodwork to get a payday because these are very wealthy brothers, versus the other way of looking at it, if one person comes forward and all of these allegations are true, then it allows other people to come forward and they finally feel comfortable and safe to come forward. Two different narratives here. And by the way, if the brothers were found guilty of something or found liable for something, it doesn't mean that they're guilty or liable of everything across the plethora of accusations. Just want to make that clear. And right now, they are innocent until proven guilty, and they have denied these accusations, and they haven't been found liable in any of these cases. But just had to make that caveat. Let's keep going. So when we look at the causes of action in her filing, and this is the same, the first cause of action alleges that Tal violated the New York City Victims of Gender Motivated Violence Act, or Protection Act. And the filing reads, by forcing sexual contact onto plaintiff, defendant committed a crime of violence motivated by gender under the Victims of Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act. The requirement that the crime of violence be committed because of gender or on the basis of gender and due at least in part to an animus based on the victim's gender is satisfied because defendant forced plaintiff to engage in sexual interaction without consent. Now, I'm sure, even though we're seeing a plethora of cases where allegations of sexual assault and misconduct and violence are being argued that they are a part of this statute, I am sure you are going to see defense attorneys suggesting that these alleged actions, even if you take them as true, would it constitute a GMVA violation? But I'm sure that's something that will be explored later on. Anyway, her second cause of action is for sexual battery. So Jane Doe claims that she was forced into having sexual physical contact with Tal Alexander, which she argues constitutes a form of rape and oral sexual conduct or sexual assault under CPLR 213C. It's a section of the New York Civil Practice Law and rules that extends the statute of limitations for certain offenses, including sexual assault and abuse and harassment. And we read through that statute. And it is true that forcing someone to touch another person's genitalia could qualify as sexual battery or sexual assault, both of which are considered as sexual offenses under this law. According to the filing, notwithstanding any other limitations set forth in this article, an action to recover damages for physical, psychological, or other injury or condition suffered as a result of conduct which would constitute a sexual offense as defined in Article 130 of the penal law committed against such plaintiff may be commenced within 20 years. So there you go, extending the statute of limitations there. Now, in terms of damages, Jane Doe is seeking compensatory damages. This is to restore her to whole. And she's also seeking punitive damages, a way to punish the defendant. And these are amounts that she says will be determined at an upcoming trial. Additionally, she is requesting that the court place a hold on any of Tal Alexander's real property and assets located in New York, ensuring they are secured throughout the legal process. This is often done to prevent a defendant from hiding or dispersing their assets before a potential judgment is reached so that the judgment could be satisfied. But now we move on to lawsuit number 2. So this is December 2011, Miami, Florida, where another Jane Doe has filed a lawsuit against Tal and Oren Alexander, accusing them of drugging and sexually assaulting her in a hotel room. Now, according to her filing, Jane Doe met the brothers while celebrating with friends in Miami Beach. And after spending some time together, the brothers allegedly invited her to an after party, but told her they needed to return to their hotel suite first. And she claims they assured her that everything was on the up and up, their intentions were harmless. But Jane Doe agreed to go along, and once inside that hotel room, Jane Doe says she claims it felt suspiciously empty with no personal belongings in sight. And despite her growing discomfort, she claims she wasn't able to act on her instincts. And soon after, she says she was drugged and sexually assaulted. Her filing states, plaintiff was handed a drink from the minibar by one of the defendants, and plaintiff consumed it, causing her to rapidly lose consciousness moments later. Plaintiff recalls being forcibly held down while one of the defendants raped her. The other defendant watched, and then the defendants took turns raping her. During the assault, plaintiff was physically incapacitated and unable to resist due to the effects of the substance that the defendants had surreptitiously added to her drink. The next day, Jane Doe allegedly woke up alone in the hotel room, completely naked. She quickly left, returned home. She claims that the trauma left her with PTSD, nightmares, anxiety in social situations, prompting her to seek therapy, which confirmed the assault's impact on her mental health. By the way, in a case like this, if you can put forward those notes with your meeting with a mental health professional, that can be compelling evidence. Now, in this lawsuit, Jane Doe is seeking sexual battery damages along with compensatory and punitive damages, as well as the freezing of assets under the federal rules of civil procedure. But now we shift to the next lawsuit. And here you have yet another Jane Doe who's accusing Tal and Oren Alexander of drugging and sexually assaulting her under the false pretense of a safe social gathering. So this case takes us back to June 2013 when Jane Doe was apparently invited by Tal to a party at his apartment in Manhattan's West Village. Now, according to this suit, Jane Doe was 21 years old at the time. She apparently arrived on July 1st for this party, expecting a lively party, but found only Tal and Oren Alexander there, according to her. Things quickly took a very disturbing turn. Quote, plaintiff was handed an alcoholic beverage, which she consumed, after which she quickly began to feel lightheaded and disoriented. Plaintiff's memory became fragmented, but she recalls the defendants forcibly removing her clothing. Being unable to resist due to the effects of the drugged beverage, defendants took turns raping her while she remained incapacitated. By the way, I think it's going to be very important moving forward that these Jane Does and their attorneys indicate that they never spoke to each other, right? That all of these Jane Does came independently, gave their independent recollections of what happened. Because if you have Jane Does who are talking to one another and you're seeing this pattern and similar, alleged details, that could look bad for their cases. But if they all came independently and then you see the similarities in their alleged accounts, that won't look good for the brothers. Now, This Jane Doe says that she later regained consciousness alone in the apartment, naked, in extreme pain. She gathered her things, left immediately. Following the assault, she claimed she struggled with PTSD, nightmares, social withdrawal. Horrifying. Although I will say, I wonder, from a defense attorney point of view, I wonder if the brothers would say, you were assaulted and we just leave you alone in Tal's apartment. Does that make sense? Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. I'll bring that up in a second. Now, in her lawsuit, she's seeking damages under the New York City Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act. She's also suing for sexual battery, seeking compensatory punitive damages, asking for a jury trial. But now we turn the clock forward to November 2014, and we find yet another Jane Doe who accuses Tal Alexander of sexual assault. So she claims the assault occurred after what was supposed to be a date. She claims she met Tal at a nightclub in Soho. It's currently called Gospel. Back in the day, it was apparently called Pravda. Now, the two, according to her, exchanged numbers. Tal texted her days later to invite her to a date at his apartment where he offered to have drinks with her before going to an event. But she claims once she arrived, that is when things also took a dark turn. According to her filing, within minutes of her arrival, he aggressively kissed her and pulled her toward his bedroom. Plaintiff tried to resist, stating she was not comfortable, but defendant overpowered her. He forcibly removed her clothing and pushed her onto his bed. Ignoring her protests, he raped her, causing extreme physical pain and emotional distress. The entire assault lasted approximately 30 minutes, after which defendant nonchalantly got up, pointed to a tuxedo hanging near his bedroom, and stated he had an event to attend. Defendant told plaintiff to see herself out and then entered the shower, dismissing her presence. Wow. Now, you remember when I said that a defense attorney would jump on this and say, look, you're just going to leave that other Jane Doe in an apartment after an assault? Well, now, if we're seeing this alleged pattern of allegedly committing an assault and moving on like nothing happened, look, while these are heinous allegations, and yes, these are just allegations at this point, but we have seen that kind of behavior before in other cases. So taking this as true, again, wouldn't be the first time I heard something like this. But again, these are just allegations. He'll have an opportunity to prove that he didn't do this. Regardless, that is a very, very wild and disturbing claim. And Jane Doe says that she left immediately, but in the months that followed, she too suffered and experienced severe anxiety, depression, PTSD. She claims seeing Tal in public triggered panic attacks. She is also suing under the New York City Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act and for sexual battery, requesting compensatory punitive damages, a jury trial. Fast forward to 2015, when yet another Jane Doe has filed a lawsuit. This time, this one's different, for an alleged assault that took place, of all places, according to her, in Moscow, Russia. So unlike the previous cases, this filing is apparently not eligible for protection under the New York City Gender-Motivated Violence Act, as the assault occurred outside of the 5 boroughs of New York. However, it seems what they're arguing is that it does potentially qualify under CPLR 213C, which I mentioned before. And they say that the court has jurisdiction because this impacts New York law. The defendant is domiciled in New York or does business in New York. And it's our understanding if the defendant and the plaintiff both reside in New York, courts could have jurisdiction over the case even if the assault occurred outside of the country, since this law is designed to protect survivors of sexual offenses, allowing them to file civil lawsuits in New York even if the crime occurred or the alleged assault occurred outside of the state or country. Again, as long as both parties have ties to New York. So, according to this Jane Doe, she was living in New York City at the time she met Tal Alexander while socializing at a restaurant. And she says she declined his invitation to get drinks that night, but later exchanged contact information with him. But then in June of 2015, Tal allegedly reached out to her, invited her to meet up with him while he was in Moscow, and she agreed. They met for drinks, and soon after, again, this is when things took a turn. Quote, after a couple of drinks at various venues, plaintiff became physically disoriented and physically incapacitated. Plaintiff's memory became fragmented, but she recalls being forcibly transported to a private bathroom in Tal's hotel room. Seeing another woman present, though she was unsure of how she arrived there, defendant then began raping her while she was unable to resist and the door was locked. And very similar to what we've been talking about, when Jane Doe claims she regained consciousness, she argues she was disoriented and in pain, that she gathered her things, took an Uber home. But here's the thing, unlike the others, She claims she did contact Tal Alexander afterward to ask him about what happened, but she says he never responded. She claims the assault caused her to suffer from PTSD, recurring nightmares, anxiety in social settings, difficulties in her personal relationships. She's suing for sexual battery, requesting a jury trial, and seeking different damages. That brings us now to January 1st, 2017, out in Miami, Florida, where a woman also going by Jane Doe is accusing Oren Alexander of sexually assaulting her in a private residence. Now, Doe says that she was at a nightclub in the area when she ended up meeting Oren Alexander and his brothers. And after talking for some time, the group decided to continue the fun at an after party, supposedly at the brothers' residence. But again, that is when things took a terrible turn because, according to Jane Doe, quote, while at the residence, plaintiff consumed a drink provided to her, after which she began to feel disoriented and lost control over her awareness. Plaintiff experienced moments of consciousness interspersed with blackouts, leading her to suspect that something had been slipped into her drink. During these periods of semi-consciousness, plaintiff recalls feeling defendant groping her body both above and below her clothing. Plaintiff attempted to resist, but due to her impaired state, she was unable to effectively fight back. Plaintiff would regain consciousness intermittently, only to find defendant engaging in non-consensual sexual intercourse with her. Next morning, Jane Doe claims she woke up feeling confused and disoriented, ultimately leaving the residence in a daze. She's suing for sexual battery, seeking the same legal remedy as the other women who have filed similar claims. Again, just what a pattern we are seeing here. All allegations, but what a pattern. Moving forward to September 2017, another woman has filed a lawsuit against Oren Alexander, accusing him of assaulting her under very troubling circumstances. This woman says that she met Oren through a dating app, had made plans to meet for breakfast and coffee in New York City on September 1st. But the encounter, again, hate to keep using the same words, but quickly took a dark turn when Oren texted her claiming he was running late, suggested she come to his apartment instead. Trusting him, she agreed, and she claims when she arrived at his Manhattan apartment, Oren had offered her a cup of tea while he finished getting ready. But after drinking the tea, the plaintiff claims she began to feel sedated and dizzy, her body unresponsive to her attempts to move. Quote, within minutes of consuming the tea, plaintiff began to feel severely sedated, dizzy, and incapable of controlling her body. Plaintiff lost her ability to resist, at which point defendant led her to his bedroom and sexually assaulted and raped her. Plaintiff was rendered unconscious for a period of time thereafter, and when she awoke, she realized she had been violated. Oren allegedly showed no remorse afterward, according to her, casually telling the plaintiff to make herself at home and clean up before leaving the apartment. Still disoriented, she struggled to leave and later found herself outside near a Prada store, confused, unsure how she had ended up there. Now, interestingly, she says that she reportedly woke up while she was walking outside near the store. So is she claiming she was in some sort of semi-consciousness up until and even past the point when she left? It's not entirely clear, but the psychological impact of that assault was profound, according to her. She claims that she began to experience extreme anxiety, disassociation, emotional distress, symptoms that escalated over time into flashbacks and severe panic attacks, signs of PTSD. Next, November 2017, another Jane Doe filed a lawsuit against Oren Alexander, alleging that he sexually assaulted her. But this one actually has a twist because she's claiming that he was pretending to be his brother Alon. But it's worth noting that Alon is not named as a defendant in this suit because she's not claiming he was playing any role in this alleged switch-up. So this woman claims that she was in a romantic relationship with Alon at the time, and the incident allegedly occurred during a visit to Alon's home in Soho, where she says the couple had consensual sex. However, after Alon excused himself to use the bathroom, the plaintiff claims Oren entered, switched places with his brother, and sexually assaulted her. The lawsuit states that the plaintiff didn't immediately recognize it was Oren, because again, they're twin brothers, but later realized when she saw his face and out of fear of retaliation, she says she didn't immediately bring this up when it happened. Next, we move into 2018, and we have another lawsuit, this time against Alon Alexander for an alleged assault on February 1st. And after meeting him at a social event in Miami, Florida, this Jane Doe says or claims she was invited to dinner at his Manhattan residence. And shortly after drinking 2 glasses of wine, she claims she started to feel disoriented and incapacitated. Quote, upon arriving at defendant's residence, plaintiff recalls consuming what she believes to be no more than 2 glasses of wine. However, shortly after consuming the drinks, plaintiff began to feel severely disoriented. Plaintiff has memories of Alon then raping her. The next morning, plaintiff awoke feeling disoriented, nauseated, and in distress. She observed that her appearance was in disarray, further supporting her belief that she had been violated while incapacitated. Now, the suit makes no mention of her leaving the residence after this alleged incident, but perhaps it's assumed that this occurred. And like we've seen with the other accusers that we've mentioned, she claims she suffered adverse mental health effects from her alleged trauma. And now this leads us to our next lawsuit. And it's particularly significant because it marks the first time in this episode that we are going to be talking about a named accuser, a woman who has chosen to actually publicly identify herself, which you have to imagine, not easy. Does that add more credibility to her claims or not? Well, going public and making these accusations, not easy. But look, she'll still have to prove her case in a court of law. But identifying herself, again, that adds a different layer to this. Now, we're talking about Leah Peters, and she has come forward to accuse Oren Alexander of sexually assaulting her in Miami in March of 2018. And this case provides an opportunity to discuss the issue of anonymity in sexual assault claims, because generally, courts are pretty sympathetic to plaintiffs seeking anonymity due to the sensitive nature of these cases, considering factors like vulnerability and potential retaliation when weighing whether to allow a person to use a pseudonym when filing. However, as I mentioned before, not all requests for anonymity are granted or allowed to continue. A notable example is the case of Anna Kaye, who initially filed anonymously in her lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs and others after Combs' ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura sued him. But in June of 2023, a judge ruled that Kaye could not remain anonymous due to a lack of specific evidence supporting her claim that she was going to be in danger or suffer some sort of harm if she had to reveal her identity. That ruling said the court recognizes that public disclosure of Doe's identity could have a significant impact on her, particularly given the graphic nature and disturbing allegations in this case. While the court does not take plaintiffs' concerns lightly, the court cannot rely on generalized, uncorroborated claims that disclosure would harm plaintiff to justify her anonymity. Without more specific support, plaintiff fails to overcome the prejudice to defendants and public interest factors implicated here. Okay, just keep that in mind. But now we go back to the complaint. So Peters alleges that she first met Oren Alexander at a party, accepted his offer for a private tour of his home. However, once inside a bedroom, this situation, according to her, quickly turned violent. Defendant suddenly and aggressively threw her onto the bed. Plaintiff resisted, expressing shock and fear, but defendant forcibly kissed her, ignoring her objections. He overpowered her, restraining her movements and removing her clothing against her will, and proceeded to rape her. Following the assault, defendant pulled plaintiff into the shower, aggressively scrubbing her body. Plaintiff, still in a state of shock and fear, complied out of an instinct for self-preservation. Defendant then escorted her back to the party, acting as though nothing had happened. Upon rejoining the crowd, plaintiff was approached by another individual believed to be defendant's brother, who made a degrading comment, "You're lucky my brother even touched you." In the years that followed, Peters says she struggled with emotional distress, including PTSD, nightmares, anxiety. And according to her, this ongoing trauma severely impacted her ability to trust others and form healthy relationships. And finally, we're now on to the last lawsuit, dating back to October 1st, 2019, so the most recent. Now, this Jane Doe alleges that Tal Alexander lured her to his apartment under the pretense of a casual lunch. And sometime prior to the alleged incident, she says that they had met socially, exchanged contact information, arranged the meeting a week later at his residence. However, once inside his apartment, Alexander allegedly closed the door behind her, became aggressive, and dragged her into his bedroom. And despite her repeated attempts to resist, Alexander allegedly overpowered her and raped her. According to her filing, once inside of the defendant's apartment, defendant closed the door and immediately became aggressive, dragging plaintiff into his bedroom. Plaintiff attempted to resist, but defendant forcefully grabbed her hair and threw her onto the bed and restrained her. Defendant raped plaintiff while ignoring her repeated verbal and physical resistance. Afterward, the plaintiff claims that Alexander showed no remorse, reportedly telling her to leave, claiming he had other matters to attend to. And left in shock, the plaintiff didn't immediately report the incident, fearing retaliation, the stigma of speaking out. But in the days that followed, the plaintiff experienced, according to her, severe anxiety, flashbacks, emotional distress, ultimately developing PTSD. And this psychological toll made it difficult for her to trust others or form meaningful relationships, according to her. Now, all three Alexander brothers have denied the allegations. Tal Alexander's attorney, Diane, issued a statement dismissing the accusations as a cash grab, asserting Tal is an easy target for so-called accusers who will fabricate stories for financial benefit. A federal court has already dismissed claims under this statute as time-barred. This transparent attempt at a cash grab will fail, and we expect these frivolous lawsuits filed days before the law is set to expire will also be dismissed. In a similar vein, Alon Alexander denied the allegations through his attorney. The only sexual encounters I have had in my lifetime have been consensual and legal. I have never drugged a woman, nor have I ever had sex with a woman who I believed was drugged. Oren Alexander's legal team also denied the accusations, calling them a money grab, and added, these belated allegations should be seen for what they are, a last-ditch money grab barred by state law. Oren will establish his innocence of this concerted attack driven in every instance by financial objectives. Now, Andrew Van Arsdale of AVA Law Group, who apparently represents the 11 women who have filed these lawsuits, spoke out about the gravity of this situation, saying, they were just so incredibly brutal in their assaults and just taking whatever they wanted. We are doing everything we can to try and get some level of accountability, some form of justice for these women. And by the way, let me just tell you about the AVA Law Group. That might sound familiar because they came up in Jay-Z's case. Remember when Jay-Z was being sued by a woman who claims that he raped her when she was 13 years old back in 2000 alongside Sean Combs? That case has been dismissed. Well, one of the central points in that case was that Jay-Z says the attorney behind that, Tony Busby, the allegation was that Tony Busby didn't even do the proper research into her claims, but that he vetted them through AVA Law Group, that they first looked into it. So again, that's why you might see that name and might say, oh, why does that sound familiar? Now, as the legal battle intensifies, the fate of these Alexander brothers, it remains uncertain. But I will tell you, the growing number of lawsuits, it signals that the full scope of their alleged actions, it is still being uncovered. And sure, they're innocent until proven guilty. Sure, these are just accusations. We don't know if they're all true, but we just keep seeing more and more and more. And for the women who have come forward, if their allegations are true, first, particularly Leah Peters, if it's true, to name yourself, it's very difficult. And this fight, though, you have to imagine is more than just about financial restitution, right? It's about, if you believe their counsel, and you believe their claims, it is about holding the men accountable for what are essentially crimes. Now, the Alexander brothers are currently jailed in New York on federal sex trafficking charges. Their trial scheduled to begin in early 2026. This criminal case is only the beginning of their legal troubles because of all the lawsuits they're now facing. We will continue to follow this, but again, they are innocent until proven guilty. They will have their opportunity to defend themselves both in the criminal court and in these civil cases, but my gosh, what a development. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.